This episode is brought to you by The Venture Project. Venture Project is a business incubator and co-working space in the fabulous Osh, Vegas, Wisconsin. However, we do remote consults. We also travel all over the country. So if you guys have a business idea or are interested in participating in the Venture Project community, please go to theventureprojectoshkosh.com where you can learn more about me and the Venture Project itself. Once again, this is theventureprojectoshkosh.com. All right, today's show, we had Drew Neisser on, the founder of Renegade and CMO Huddles, CMO podcast host, Ad Age columnist, speaker, author, board member, and he's also a Ben Franklin nut and a wannabe time traveler. Folks, this was a fantastic episode. You are going to learn all about B2B marketing. We had a fantastic conversation digging into how brands can start to differentiate themselves, how this applies to a person who just has ideas, or this applies to a company that has hundreds of potential employees. So without any further ado, I want to introduce you guys to Drew Neisser, a fantastic guest and an expert marketer on Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews podcast.
Welcome to Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews, the only show that's going to teach you how to be somebody.
Where in your life did you learn that you're not good enough?
And how do you take what you're most passionate about and what you're most fearful of, and what is the plan to overcome that fear, and what is the plan to enact that passion?
Welcome to Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews. I'm your host, AJ Armstrong. You can follow me on Instagram at AaronArmstrong33, or you can always go to my website, AaronJArmstrong.com. Joining us from New York, we got Drew Neisser, and he is going to share with us some marketing strategies. He is a business strategist, a marketer, a master of all things to do with B2B marketing, but we're going to dig into many more aspects in the personal growth and development realm as well. So Drew, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's amazing to be here. I mean, I've listened to your show and you have some fantastic guests.
Oh, I'm so glad we got you here. Yeah. We were just chatting in the pre-show about New York life and how things have been a lot different lately, but we're back at it in the business world, huh?
Oh my God. Not only are we back in the business world, we're back at it. I mean, I was out to dinner last night and there were so many people out eating. And one, you would never know there was a pandemic going on, except for the fact that people are eating on the sidewalk. But it is, I mean, New York is really coming back. It's great to see.
Well, this is awesome. I wanted to give our guests a little background. So I wanted you to kind of just go into your story a little bit. Tell us a little bit about your background, your childhood upbringing, and then what led into your professional career.
So one of the funny things is I was thinking about my personal journey, and it's sort of this combination of resilience, endurance, and just learning how to find opportunity right in the middle of setbacks. Mm-hmm. And there's so many different ones I could start with. I was really short as a kid. I was like 5'6" when I was 18. I'm now 6'0". And there just were ways that I figured out how to get around that. And then there's one moment, and I can think about so many different moments in my life where things went wrong, or I thought they went wrong, and it ended up being an incredible thing for me. And it sort of created this notion of, wait, there's a crisis, maybe there's an opportunity. I'll give you two quick examples that feel pedantic in the face of firefighters and, losing your sisters and things. But everyone in my family, all the males in my family went to the same college. I didn't get in. So it's like, oh, what am I going to do? Anyway, I ended up getting into Duke, which was the greatest thing in my life. I have been involved in that organization ever since. I'm now on the national board. So the school that I didn't get into, that was one example. I asked a woman to marry me. She wasn't the right one, but I had this fantasy that maybe she was. She did me a favor and said no. So that's another example. But there's so many in my life where there have been this moment. I lost 4 jobs in 2 years and then realized, okay, I'm going to be head of an agency before I'm 40 because it's the only way I can have job security, or I got to get out. I applied to film school, screwed those up, ended up moving to New York and never looked back. So I just have this pattern in my life of when things are really kind of not the way I thought they were going to be, is say, okay, there's an opportunity here. And there's so many I can share from the business stories as well that have shaped even in the last 2 years.
Tell me a little bit about that. I mean, I think that's the story that everybody kind of needs to understand in their life, right? Is that there's going to be what you plan on and then what happens. And the question is, how do you react and respond in those circumstances? And I think based on what you've described is these things have turned out to be incredible because of these different detours and pivots and difficult paths that kind of popped up in your life. And the message from you seems to be that's what resiliency is all about, right? This is figuring out how to deal with that.
Well, and it's sort of pausing for the moment and taking a breath. I mean, I was thinking about this and I hadn't thought about it for a while, but when 9/11 happened, I had a responsibility. There were 35 people in my office and I had to make sure that they all got home, and not all of them could. So I was the last person to leave. My son, my 4-8-year-old son, was the last person to be picked up at his school. And minute I get home, I'm sort of deer in the headlights like everybody else. And then I thought, wait, what could our customers do to help not end this situation? And fortunately, at the time we were working with Panasonic, they were able to get flashlights down there. We were working with IBM. They were able to get laptops down there. And so that was just one example early of this moment in 2008, where and a couple things happened. We're going to lose our largest client, and it was 70% of our business. And they were walking out the door. They had been 15. They say, if you're not going to put all your eggs in one basket, sit on that basket carefully. Well, we did for 15 years, which is a good run. Seeing that they were going to leave, I went to Dentsu, who I had started the company with, and said, you know what? I can't write a business plan for you. The next, I don't know how many years are going to be terrible. Sell me the company and let me see what I can do. And they did. And suddenly I was an entrepreneur, which is really kind of what I was meant to be anyway. And so that was a moment. Then I didn't expect that we'd go into the worst economic meltdown since 1929 and that we'd get stiff at $500,000. But that just caused another thing to do, which is focus. And I went, okay, because we had to radically reduce our agency and almost start again. And that started a really important seed in my life, which was, one, we're going to focus on social and content. And two, in order to do that, I'm going to have to start writing and interviewing. And so literally I wrote article every single week for 52 weeks. And that started me on blogging. That led to podcasting. That's led to 2 books. And anyway, so that's 10,000 hours easily of CMO interviews. But I want to get to one other one that happened in the pandemic, if you don't mind. So having been through all of these things over my career, in March 17th or 14th, depending on when I looked at the pandemic, and I saw that this was a moment of crisis. I had no idea whether or not what was going to happen to our business. But I did know that I had a lot of friends out there and we could make more. And so I reached out to a bunch of CMOs that I knew that I'd interviewed over the last 10 years and said, hey, let's just meet, maybe even on a weekly basis, and let's just talk about the challenges you face, and maybe collectively we can work our way through this. Well, we ended up having 55 of what became CMO huddles between April 1st and October 1st of 2020. By the end of September, it's clear there was a business. So October 1st, 2020, we started a new company called CMO Huddles. We now have 90 subscribers, and it is the most purposeful work of my career. I'm about to turn 65. So I just want to tell you that to finally sort of get to the most purposeful work in your career at 64 and a half is kind of an amazing thing for me personally. And I hope your listeners realize that this journey, my wife calls me a late boomer bloomer, but things are coming together in the weirdest possible way at the late stage of one's career.
Tell me a little bit about the CMO Huddle and what it is, what it offers, and some of those things that I'll backtrack into eventually what the pandemic and how that kind of inspired this idea.
Basically, at its core, we're B2B marketers. And I moderate these conversations. Any given day, there's 10 to 15 huddlers in these conversations. We have a curriculum. And my belief is that CMOs can change the world. And they can do that by driving purpose in their organization. But they can't do that unless they know how to drive demand, because you don't get a seat at the table unless you can grow revenue. Period. End of story. It may or may not be the right way, but that's reality. So drive demand, then get to purpose. And once you can talk about purpose, now suddenly I'm having a big impact because I'm helping these CMOs drive purpose in their organization. So that's my purpose. But so we have these huddles. We also have bonus huddles. We arrange one-on-ones. There's notes online. There's a directory. There's all the things that you would hope to find in a community that we built out over the last 12 months. Exactly.
And what was it about the pandemic that you found this need there? How did you kind of discover this?
So part of it was I had been part of another organization called the CMO Club. That was B2B and B2C, and I had been part of that for 12 years. And so I got very familiar with the needs of CMOs. And so I really focused on, okay, what is the issue right now? And so initially in April, when we met on the 1st, the issue was, how are we going to lead our employees who are remote? How are we going to do this? Because most of these folks hadn't done it. And then as the summer went along, new issues popped up. Black Lives Matter, safety, protocols, technology, all of these things kept rising to the surface. And suddenly, by the way, events, which had been 50% of the lead flow for almost every one of these companies, was no longer possible. So they were all struggling with, well, what are the right events? What's physical events, virtual events? What do we do? How do we manage them? And so we were talking about that. And one would come in and say, hey, we just did an evaluation of all of these platforms to do virtual events. Well, that was hugely helpful. So thank you for that. And we just kept going at the issues. And then when the Black Lives Matter movement came up, every CMO in the thing had to sort of look at themselves in the mirror and say, are you going to play a role in this? Is your company going to play a role? What is your role? What are you going to do? And they all shared and really worked through that issue.
What do you think, kind of going into the future a little bit, being a part of these circles, these kind of like CMO circles and trying to forecast, and you as a strategist and a CMO, what does it look like trying to shape the marketing landscape? Where should people be spending some more time and energy and attention for, whether it's a small business or a mid-sized company or a solopreneur? What are you kind of seeing as the emerging area?
So I'm going to step back and answer that question a little bit differently, because I think part of the problem that small businesses have is they are chasing that new thing, and they'll say, oh, we should be on Facebook or we should be on TikTok because that's the next thing. Really, the hard work is in the strategy, right? And figuring out, what is your organizational purpose? Why do you exist? And in my book, which is called Renegade Marketing, which comes out in October, it really talks about, and this is excellent, the first 3 chapters any business could read and get value out of, because chapter 1 is clear away the clutter. Find some focus, because what happens is, as a small business person, is you have a list of 1,000 things to do and you can't do them all. So focus is your friend. So that's part 1. Part 2 is daring to be distinct. Every small business has an opportunity to be distinctive, but very few are. So just pause right there and say, what is it that makes this distinctive? Then we can get to purpose, because often purpose can be the thing that makes you distinct. And by the way, I'm not saying you have to save the world, but you can make a difference in the world in which you operate. And that's what purpose, and I define purpose in that way. So it's big P purpose. So really my message to any business before you're looking for the trend, we can get to trends, is if your strategy isn't right, if you haven't figured out what differentiates your brand, if you're not distinctive in the way you talk, the way you look, it doesn't matter what channel you go on.
Yeah.
You're going to fail.
Oh, yeah.
And then the other part of this is peanut butter effect. So this is a thing we see all the time. This is one of the reasons I wanted to write this book, was that B2B marketers, particularly at larger companies, had 9 different personas, and they had 20 different channels, and they were doing different messagings in every single channel that looked differently and sound differently. And so they were spread so thin, there was no impact at all. And so again, this focus is more than just being distinctive, but you don't have to be in every channel. You have to be in the channels that you can win in, and you have to be in the channels that are the best channels, either for your customer to sort of where they're most engaged, or for where you have the best chance of standing out.
Yeah, I love the idea of not jumping on the trends. So like when we launched the venture project, I was kind of sharing a little bit about the venture project with you 9 months ago. It was like the peak of COVID, right? So nothing was really going on in the local business community. There's no news, there's nothing. So the motto we had was, I said, well, let's go analog. And what that means is like, just, we're not going to push so much on social media. Obviously, we're millennials and we're relevant there, but we're going to go local newspaper, local TV stations. We're going to go local influencers. We're going to find different types of community support, all these different aspects. It's kind of like in the old school marketing playbook. Like this is what they would have gotten out of a 90s textbook. Instead, everyone thinks marketing is digital marketing. No, digital marketing is one piece of marketing. But this was an approach, and we knew we needed to get the public interest to buy in because it's a local centric business. And that was kind of the strategy we took. And it got us all of our leads. And in fact, we've been riding that wave really until like this month. We've still been riding a lot of that interest. And I think that's kind of a little, in one way, what you're kind of mentioning, where what's going to differentiate you? Where's your business at? And how are you interrupting them where they are?
There are lots of brands I know out there that, while, look, you can't live without a website. There is no doubt today you can't do business without a good website. And that's fundamental. And I have a tremendous respect, and you can do a lot in digital. But there is something called digital fatigue right now. We are all facing it. And so it's amazing. Outdoor, killing it. TV advertising, killing it. It's amazing. It really, it's very old school. Now, if you can combine those with digital, so if you did TV or you did outdoor and then you have SEO or SEM right underneath it, then you got something really good going on.
How do you combat that going forward? I think it's very real. I had a whole bunch of speaking opportunities in 2020 that got canceled, and some of them shifted to digital. I mean, it's just obvious the engagement wasn't there. People sit on Zoom calls all day for work. I mean, this is a Zoom call. It'd be way cooler if you flew in. We got you right here in the studio. But it's just like, eventually, it's just so much to sit on another call, another thing. And then we're starting to see, which I think is going to push people away from digital marketing in a lot of ways, is that people are starting to realize how addictive this is and how disruptive it is to your dopamine, how depressed people are getting. And if you can't see it, what I'm holding up is my phone. And that's, I purposely track tasks right here in a notebook, because I know that I won't get it done if I go in there with a device that's attention engineered against me. It's designed to pull me away from whatever I'm doing into a different thing and spin me around like a Super Bowl down a hallway. And I think that there's something there. And I'm curious of what your thoughts are on this combating of the digital fatigue and the behavior impacts it might have on people and where that could lead to for a marketer.
So I think there are a couple of things to be thinking about as an entrepreneur and business owner and so forth. One is the impact that it's having on your employees. And I talk a lot about that in the book because I believe the employees are your first and foremost audience. You start there and you think about, what are my employees like? Could we just have a no Zoom Friday, for example? Let's just start there. What are the things that we can do internally that will decrease digital fatigue and improve sort of engagement and community building? So that's sort of part one of this. And then part two of it, frankly, for brands, and we talk a lot about this in CMO huddles, is that you've got to raise the bar. And so if you thought this was good, if you had this level of speaker last time, you need this level of speaker this time. I mean, the bar keeps going. And so I think that the key thing for content creators, which is most brands, is even Google won't care about your quantity. They just don't care. They are looking for quantity. If you want to do well on an SEO basis, you have to have really good reports. And I'll tell you about the mother of all blog reports I did that led up to this book in a second. But quality is everything right now. So quality will overcome the fatigue. And so that's part of this thinking is, well, how do I do it better, right? What could be more creative? Could there be a different format for it? So for example, a number of brands are struggling to say close a deal right now because they used to be able to have an event. They could bring them and they could have customers. So they're doing that virtually. And they're saying, all right, but we're going to send everybody a really good bottle of wine, a really good whiskey, and we're going to have a sommelier or a whiskey expert, and we're going to run them through that. We're going to have a very cool conversation that will just be about them and their world. And then we'll let the customers talk about how they're using the product or service in a way that the prospects will go, oh, that's kind of cool. Tell me more. So these are really carefully crafted virtual events that are really good at sometimes top of the funnel and also very good at accelerating deals. But that's just an example. And that bar is getting higher. You can't do cheap wine anymore. You can't do any whiskey anymore. You just keep having to sort of challenge yourself. Now, one of the things I would say to you is if you have a big brand idea underneath it and like you're thinking local, so everything you do is going to be informed by local, right? And so is there a local brand of beer, wine, whatever that you could do an event with so that you're bringing that idea, connecting it back to your core brand?
Yeah, I love that. I know. And I think that's really interesting. What do you think about in this world of attention, The game is of attention right now, right? So it's like, how do we find new opportunities to pull people away for someone just starting out, a brand that's younger, newer, doesn't have massive resources to put into a high production, attention engineered post, or doesn't have the copywriting team to sit there and make the caption exactly what it needs to say? How can someone get some traction right now in this world that seems to be the game of how can we best attention engineer you on the phone? What we decided was I was just like, we're not going to play it. We're going to play a game where we want to play and meet people where they are. We can go back to handing out flyers and get more business doing that than we did running an Instagram ad because people are so addicted to their phones. I'm curious, like, what do you think? What can somebody do? Either play or not play or what they got to do, you know?
The first way I frame this is we live in this give to get economy. In other words, you have to give something of value in order to get anybody's attention. I mean, look at Google. They're giving you search the world. You're giving them their eyeballs, right? Facebook, similar business model. But there are any number of software companies out there that are giving their product away free. And in order to get you started, and then you go, oh, this is pretty good. I guess I need to pay for it. So the give to get model works very well for almost any brand. The key figuring out is, what are you going to give?
What do they want, right?
Yeah, it's what do they want? And what could you do that would make their lives better? And I'll go back to CMO huddles for a second. I knew that if I brought those folks together and they had a really good conversation and helped solve their problems, that was a give. And we did that for 6 months. There was no charge at all because kind of thinking that there was going to be a get for us. We didn't know exactly what it was going to be, but we gave a lot. I think about your podcast. I've recorded 260 podcast episodes as of this one. I've written hundreds of articles on chief marketing officers. I can't tell you that I knew exactly how it was going to pay out, but I knew as long as it was authentically in my voice and had a little bit of Drew personality, and that there was insights in that content, whatever I created, there was something that a marketer could learn from, was going to have a chance to move the ball and get people interested in having a conversation. So that mindset, in the book, I call it sell through service. It's not like sell through selling, it's sell through service. What can you do? What actions can you take to help your customer in any part of their lives? I know a number of brands that just try to help people smile during the day. And that's built into their thing, their brand. They're just amazingly humorous people.
I think that's Disney's method, right? Isn't it? Well, we want every customer to have a smile or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, sort of make magic in people's lives. Yeah. I mean, I think that is Disney's motto, but I think you don't have to be Disney to do that.
Yeah.
But if you're a CEO of a company, you founded a company, and there's something you're passionate about, I don't care what it is, if you can bring that passion to your brand, sometimes that's what you can do to sort of engage and build a community around your company. You don't have to talk about your business necessarily to sell your business. It's just incredible. In fact, during huddles, one CMO said to me, the less we try to sell, the more we sell. I thought, there it is. There's the gold mine.
I want to talk about two things. The first one is, I think we understand to some level that we want to be valuable first, right? That this has this reciprocity effect, the kind of give to get model, as you mentioned. What I see people struggle with, and what I also struggle with, is how do we give them something that's helpful? And I like what you brought the example up of, well, one could be making somebody smile, like an entire brand with that. I like that result, right? Like that seems to be a result. Boom. Like that's a very, if that's what we're going for, there's lots of things we could try to do that. What are some other methods or some other things you could do to get people to find what is this valuable thing we're going to offer? There's so many entrepreneurs I know, and they're like, oh, I'm going to just start a podcast and talk because I have value, man. And it's like, well, you're number one, not a very good talker. Number two, it's not that valuable. And I understand that you're trying to do this give to get thing, but it's just not helpful to people. Maybe you should go fishing and teach people how to do that to be more valuable, So I'm kind of curious on your thoughts on how to find that valuable give for people.
Well, one of the ways to do is to think about, all right, how do we make our customers to look good? This is particularly true in B2B. So one way to start is talk to your customers, right? Or your prospects, and you interview them. And the output of the interview, though, should be something that's good for this customer. So almost everybody out there wants to get exposure for their brand too, right? So if you say, whatever market you're targeting, you went and interviewed 25 people who were in that market, and you offered to feature all of them somewhere, whether it was on your brand, on your website, or somebody else's website where you arranged for it. Suddenly you'd have 25 people who would be singing your praises, and they would just say, wow, that was pretty cool. Look at that. They featured me here. They called me a star. They wrote about me. And by the way, in the process of doing those interviews, if you can identify 3 or 4 or 5 things that are common across all of them, you're just not listening. And that's the power of this. And I'm sure you find this. I love doing these interviews because I keep learning. And that's the whole purpose of it. And I learn in a way that, oh, okay, I bet I could share that with 10 CMOs and they'll get value out of that. So the problem is that a lot of folks just don't want to put in the time to do the interviews because they go, oh, they don't want to talk to me. Oh, I don't. And there's some skill involved in interviewing. I will admit, I don't know about you, but I recorded 30 podcasts before I got 5 that I liked. But the point is you start and you do these interviews and you try to find a group of people that are at least similar enough so that you can get some really, really deep insights out of them.
That's interesting. And I think that could be kind of translated into a very tactical plan for someone, right? They could, you could decide, I'm going to interview 12 people like me at this business, right? 12 people in our local business leaders podcast that we're about to launch. Weave in some questions, what have you noticed are some of the biggest challenges, just going forward and growing? They tell you the recipe, right? They say, this is what we're struggling with. We just really can't seem to grab leads in the Gen Z, demographic or whatever, and then that becomes, do we have a solution in our consulting practice, or do we know somebody in the business world we can broker and find value in delivering that to them? I think that could be a very, very easy way. Anybody could really jump into this, especially podcasters or someone listening to this. You and me could have a great conversation and boom, all of a sudden like, wow, your book could be a great tool for us, or your company or my company could be a great tool for you, or we could collaborate on something. And it just develops into a business opportunity by taking the time to understand exactly what they're looking for.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we've in the book, I talk a lot about how you can build programs around this kind of market research. And it doesn't have to be limited to qualitative interviews. You can do surveys. And these days, surveys are easy to do. You can use a poll fish and get some research out there. And then suddenly you have proprietary content, or IP as they call it. You have information that others will find of interest and of value. And again, you're not talking about yourself. You're talking about a problem that you've identified, which gives you permission to go back to these 25 that you interviewed and say, hey, by the way, I just fielded this research. What do you think of that? You get them back into the research study. Then you have something that your salesperson can go out and sell against because you've identified the problem that, oh, by the way, your company solves. So, and you can build your whole program. And it all started with just you having conversations with your customers and prospects.
That's a great, it's a great simplified way to do kind of like focus group market research, right? But it's more modern. It brings other people into it that you might not be able to contact with. I love that strategy. I think it's a great tactical strategy. The other thing I was going to ask you, Drew, is just kind of like going on the lines of purpose and kind of, bringing your purpose into the business world. Sometimes I see entrepreneurs pick one or the other. They either chase the money or they just do what they want to do because they feel called to it. And I think that there's some balance in between there. What is your thought from kind of, being in the CMO space? What is the right method between finding the purpose and delivering it to a monetizable end state?
So it's very tricky. This is really hard. I mean, just because you have a stated purpose doesn't mean you're going to make money. And just because you go to say, I'm going to try to make money doesn't mean you're going to make money. And they're difficult. I mean, some people find it very easy to know what their purpose is as individuals, and some companies find it easy to do it as well. It takes a lot of soul searching. And I have to say, I mean, Renegade's purpose, my agency's purpose, was a little p purpose. We existed to help our customers find ways to cut through. It's not a big purpose. We weren't trying to save the world, although we did see a lot of pollution out there in marketing and we wanted to turn marketing into a service. But still, it was a little p purpose. We wanted to help our clients cut through. So at least the promise of cutting through, that's why I've got a saw behind me. And, at least that promise was clear. And so if you wanted to work with a company that would help you cut through, talk to Renegade. And the employees kind of knew, okay, our job is to cut through. So that means we need to have cut through processes. We need to be thinking about, is there a shorter way to do this? So it became a mindset, but it wasn't a save the world kind of purpose. It was just I'll call it a little p, almost functional purpose. That was a clear promise. Now I feel informed because I think CMOs can change the world. And so my purpose and CMO Huddle's purpose is to help them do that.
That's good. I think that's a great message for, someone starting out too, that has the capital P and just doesn't know where to start, right? And then it's like, hey, well, how do we make that a lowercase p and find a way where we can make an impact on your immediate community and your immediate clients and just go from there? Because it's really like, I think it just comes back to that old saying, you can't help everyone, but you can help who you can. And that I think is the kind of looking at that little p first before it grows into the big P, right?
Yeah. And, another thing that's sort of rare, but I love it when I hear it, is when companies say, we exist for our employees. It's like, and not many companies do that, but the ones that do that, and you see them, they're usually always the ones that are in the top 10 places to work in, the various cities. And when you do that, you see something special at those companies. You see retention rates much higher. You see their recruitment rates where the number of offers they give. You see people wanting to work there. And that, let's face it, without great employees, and today it's really, really hard. It's very competitive out there. So sometimes it's, why do you exist for you exist for your employees? Okay, now define that a little bit more closely in terms of what you really want. And then that means you're a values-driven organization. That's pretty good. That gets you to purpose.
Yeah. I think I resonate with that too. I mean, I have 4 employees right now, and I want to pay them better. I mean, it's like almost that is more important to me than me making money. Like, I want to make money so I can build this team so we can impact and do other things. And it's not so much about just how much I get to go do lavish things with. And I can understand companies that say something like that, like, we exist for our employees. It's like, yeah, we exist to try to help these people build great lives, and they can build their families and, and all that. And it just kind of continues on. So I get that. And that really resonates with me, at least in this phase of my business journey.
Yeah. And I think it can resonate. The thing that with all of this stuff, and I talk a lot about this in the book. And so it's almost impossible for me to do a podcast without mentioning Ben Franklin. It's a long story because he's America's first chief marketing officer, but he had a phrase, which is, well done is better than well said. And that's sort of how I became obsessed with him. And so let's say you've decided that you are going to be an employee first company. You can say that, but that doesn't mean anything. It is all about the action. So everything that I talk about in the book about building a plan on a page, where I want you to take your big idea and I want you to have 6 ideas for bringing it to life against employees, 6 for customers, and 6 for prospects. And if you can do that, and by the way, it's a really easy exercise to do once you have your promise, and that is, and hopefully is purpose informed, and then So for example, if you say you're employee first, then you can say to your customers, here's a funny thing that one of our employees did. And you're basically saying because happy employees equal happy customers, you link those two. And I know a brand actually that did that very successfully and ended up getting bought. And they put all their energy into building this sort of wacky culture in the insurance category. So you talk about, unexpected sort of standing out and being distinct. They did it by focusing on employees and letting employees sort of bring their best selves to work.
Wow. And I think you're right. That is, that Ben Franklin quote really does hit it though. I mean, there's so much, you know, this working with creatives, you know, and working with, you know, different people at the micro level, working with other entrepreneurs. There's so much talk, and talk is just cheap. It's about how can we take this and put it into an actionable plan? How can we take these things and execute upon them? And that's what's going to build the results that you're looking for. What is your advice to those people, like these dreamers, these big thinkers? They got all sorts of ideas and they're just spinning their wheels. What's your advice to get them into action?
It's funny. I got an email from Dory Clark today, and Dory is just the master of the entrepreneurial brand, and she told her story, and they're always great, very personal emails. And you get down to the bottom, and at the bottom of it says, "Take the first step," and she just, and it's funny. I mean, it's like me sort of setting up that first huddle and hoping someone would show up, but it's for any entrepreneur is. You just gotta take a step. Dory described how her first blog post 10 years ago or whenever it wasn't really very good in retrospect, but she did it. She got started. And so, you know, you got to put yourself out there. There's no way you can start a company without trying. And so the problem though is if you're an entrepreneur, you might have 5 ideas. And you might have 50. And the hard part is sorting through those. And, you know, it's counterintuitive. But one thing to think about when you're thinking about an idea is as you share it with people, the more people that say it's a great idea, worry about that. Yeah, go the other way. It's like Ted Turner talked about when he was founding CNN, and the more people who told him that was a stupid idea, the world didn't need a 24-hour network, the more he believed that it was a good idea. So be careful about who you listen to. And it's funny, I've been thinking about that a lot with CMO huddles. A lot of people feel now that we've gotten to a point, they want to give me a lot of advice. And they say, well, you know, these guys did this and these guys did that. And I think about it, and then I think, yeah, that was really good at that time in service of those customers. My job is to make sure that everything I do is in service of these people. And those people have different needs than the people that you're describing from this organization. So thanks for that input. And I know you were successful over there, but really be careful about it. At the same time, here's one thing I will say. It took me 30 years in business to get an advisory board. That was the stupidest thing I ever did in my career. I finally got one, and it is the greatest thing that I've ever done. Now, it took a certain maturity to be able to actually pick the right people, ask them to do it, put a value proposition together for them, and then be open enough and secure enough to take their advice. But I got to tell you, having an advisory board is like just the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, I think it reminds me of a story. My uncle was like really entrepreneurial, but he's wild. He's a wild man. He would always just say, when my dad thinks it's a terrible idea, I know I'm on the right track. It's like he's always but he's crazy. So we can't listen to him all the time. But I think it brings it back to this idea that you want to have a circle of people with these big thoughts. You want to have this advisory board that's well qualified, that's vetted, that has interesting things to say. And I love that idea that to have that group of people. We started a group with we just smoke cigars in my office and hang out, but we have like some rules, you know, with who can join and who can enter. And it's that same thing. We just bring an idea, we bounce it off each other. If it's stupid, it dies. If it's good, we keep it going, you know, and everybody kind of goes around the room and shares. And it's our way of having an advisory board, like you're kind of discussing, kind of like your huddle, and having these other teams of people that you come together and bring thoughts. Hardest part's always, how do you vet the ideas though? How do you know which people take advice from, right? Because at some point you're inventing something new. But on the other side, what has worked can still work too. And so it's this weird balance between the progress and the tradition. And I think that the companies struggle with that all the time. We see people struggle with it in politics. It's like, what is the right, like, hey, let's just innovate. Well, this thing already works though. Why would we innovate on top of that? well, we're innovative, right? And you see that happen a lot of times with companies that go too far that way. What's your take on this dichotomy between, innovation and tradition and things that have worked for those people at that time, and how we can reapply it, not reinvent the wheel, but also make sure we're getting better?
Yeah, it's sort of funny. A lot of thoughts went through my mind. So, there are plenty of successful businesses that are just a little bit better than their predecessors. They've taken something and done it a little bit better. I mean, and there's so many business cases where, Microsoft Office versus others. And, that was not the best word. Excel was not better than Lotus, but they succeeded. And they kept going with it. So that's a bad example. Let me get back to a good example. A good example is just find something that you're confident that you can do better for a specific group of people. You don't necessarily have to invent the iPhone, right?
Yeah.
You don't. But keep in mind, the iPhone is just a better phone, right? Yeah. I still started with a phone. He didn't invent the phone. That was Alexander Graham Bell, right? So you don't have to necessarily to build a decent business if you go into it thinking, all right, there's the gap. And what's amazing to me is one of the folks that I write about in the book it's a company called Wasabi, and they're a cloud-based storage company. And the founder of that company has founded 6 companies, all of which have had major, major exits. And he thinks about things in very simple terms. I love this guy, David Friend. So first thing, he founded this company called Carbonite when his wife and his partner's daughter computer died and they lost all their files. So they just created a company based on 2 words. It's like computer backup. That was it, right? Then they said, how do we make easy computer backup? Carbonite sold it, went public. They made a lot of money. When they started Wasabi, they think about cloud storage. Let's see. Oh, Amazon. Oh, Microsoft. Oh, IBM. How could they have the chutzpah to do it? And they said, all right, well, here's the idea. We're going to do hot cloud storage 6 times faster and 80% cheaper or something like that. Pretty good value proposition. Not new necessarily. Cloud storage existed. But they got this brilliant name, Wasabi, which is like, and then hot cloud storage. So it was a very clear, it's all about the value proposition. And then they did a lot of things smart. But the last wisdom from David Friend was, if you can't describe your company in 8 words or less, you've got a problem.
Yes, I love that. I love that. And I love this theme you keep coming back to. You mentioned at the very beginning, you're mentioning it kind of again in generalities, is this little aspect of just micro differentiation, right? It's just, how are you going to be slightly different? And where are you, that's going to go into that value prop, like where we can just carve a little tiny bit of difference out of this. That is a great question for entrepreneurs. It's a great question for business owners. And I think that you've made that very clear today is that's kind of what we're looking for here. What's the difference about this? Okay, so you're a consulting company. How are you different? You're a podcaster. How are you different? You're this. How are you a little bit different? Yeah.
I mean, and we're talking about, I'm thinking about one of the clients that we work with, and I wrote about it in the book, Case Paper. They're a paper merchant. What could be sort of more generic than that? Right. This brand is differentiated on 2 levels. One, they're committed to service. Well, that doesn't sound very different, does it? But the brand, we call it On the Case. So, and that's a pun. It turns out they're very funny. They're the Joker prototype. So they're this very humorous brand that you can count on as reliable, resourceful, and responsive. They are on the case. And so that small point of focusing on that, every employee knows there's an award every single month for being reliable or resourceful or responsive. Every customer knows there's an award for them too, because their customers serve other people. And so, and they bring humor to everything they do. So 2 things, service and humor. That's it. They're just moving paper. That's all they're doing, but they're doing great. And this is a 75-year-old family-owned business. And the 3rd generation is now the CEO of the company. You see like a lot of different, means of differentiation too. We could get into it, I guess, at a technical level. But I mean, you've got like an Italian restaurant, but what could differentiate them is putting it in a different location
That's one part of it, right? Or like, hey, there's no Italian restaurants in this part of town or whatever. It could be the different style of food. It could be the different recipes or whatever. One thing that's funny is, speaking of like the paper analogy you just brought up. So I had a baby 4 months ago, first baby, right? So I'm a new dad, and everyone's sending me these like memes with the dad shoe, New Balance, the New Balance, whatever 600 series or whatever they are. And I'm just thinking it's hilarious. So I'm like, for fun, I go to New Balance's website, and they've got all these like, pop stars and really trendy people all wearing these New Balances, making them look really cool. And I was thinking of like formulating a pitch to them, like, you guys should just own the dad shoe. Be America's dad shoe. Just do it. And it would be so funny if they owned it and just went with it. I think it would be the funniest thing. And they could probably have a whole campaign on just America's dad shoe. And I was just thinking about that with the paper thing. It's like, okay, so shoes, I mean, you're competing with, it's a commodity, right? There's so many companies that are making shoes right now, and especially New Balance, the most boring plain shoe you're ever going to have. So what's going to be the thing that makes it a little different? I just kept thinking about that when you're telling the paper story. It's the same thing. It's like, what if you just wear America's dad shoe and just own that crap, man?
Yeah. And, I can hear the conversation in the room. Wait, dad is an old sounding thing. And what the key thing, though, with this is to link it to the cool dads. And by the way, there's a baby boom going on, because these are boomers' children are now having kids, right? You're 28 to 35. You're in the boom. It's the echo boom is what it was called. And so now you're having an echo boom. So demographically, there are going to be a lot of babies born in the next 3 or 4 years. There are going to be a lot of new dads in the next 3 or 4 years. So it's a really smart idea. I think what they'll be thinking about, they want to be cutting edge. And so this tricky part. And so, one of the things that I would be thinking about for them would be, how do they do that organically? Is that something that comes out of TikTok? Is that one of
YouTube or something? Yeah.
Yeah. They're one of their cooler spokespersons who also becomes a dad, sort of, is that a dad shoe? And have fun with it. Right.
Yeah.
But if they sort of take it, is the thing they can't do, and that they know is still, and this is important to anything that you all do. And this goes back to sort of clear away the clutter, is that's a really fun idea. But if it's off strategy and if it doesn't quite, if you can't do it in a way that's consistent with other things you're doing, it's problematic.
Yeah.
And so that's what they'll be thinking. Is this who we are? Is this our brand? And but I love the notion, and there's a great meme in what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's a fun thing that I think illustrates a little bit of the ideas we talked about. Who knows, and it's great getting some world-class insight too from a real CMO of how they would interpret that pitch. Here I am. Listen, guys, just own it. Just own the dad shoe. And here they are breaking it down legitimately. But that's wonderful. Well, Drew, you've been more than generous with your time today. And I really appreciate you just discussing some of these strategies with us. We could go so deep into this, but thankfully you've got just published work up the yin yang on a lot of these different topics and strategies. So if anybody heard a little tiny nugget of goodness, where can they find some more of this to really dig into some of your methods?
Yeah, it's all on renegade.com. And the new book, which is called Renegade Marketing, 12 Steps to Building B2B Unbeatable B2B Brands, is on Amazon, audiobook, both the ebook and paperback. And on renegade.com, if they don't want to read the whole book, it's only 150 pages. There is a skinny down version of it on the website for free, the mother of all blog posts. So you can find that there, and more about me and on renegade.com.
There's no excuses. No excuses. He even made a freaking SparkNotes version for you.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Hey, Drew, thanks again. Any just parting wisdom for folks out there kind of listening to the show?
I first of all, it's a wonderful and terrible thing to be an entrepreneur. I commend you for doing it. It's highly rewarding. You get to be your own boss, which often means you may not pay yourself as much as you want, but it's worth the trouble. And just think about how you're going to get your 10,000 hours in and what the payoff is going to be. And that's an interesting part. What can you do over and over and over and over and over again so you know it better than anybody else in the world? And when you do that, you're an expert and you're going to kill it.
Really appreciate you today, Drew. Once again, you guys are listening to Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews podcast. Winners featuring people crushing it in life, leaders, former athletes, CEOs, Wallets talking about personal finance, real estate, and small business. And then finally, Worldviews talking about some of the values out there that drive us and that get us there. So once again, thank you for listening. You can find more about me and this podcast at aaronjarmstrong.com.